You begin your existence as something so small you could fit on the tip of a pin. You're floating in the vast Pacific Ocean, completely helpless, drifting wherever the current takes you. You don't have a shell yet, no protection, nothing but a tiny blob of tissue that somehow needs to survive in a world that wants to eat you. The water around you is filled with millions of other creatures just like you, all competing for the same thing, a chance to make it through the next few hours without becoming someone else's lunch. This is not where you'll spend your life, though. You're searching for something specific, something that will determine whether you live or die in the next few days. You need to find the perfect spot on the ocean floor, and you need to find it fast. Your energy reserves are running out, and once they're gone, that's it. Game over. You don't get a second chance. The current pushes you along, carrying you over coral reefs, past rocky outcrops, through forests of seaweed. You're not just drifting aimlessly, though. Even at this microscopic stage, you have primitive sensors that can detect chemical signals in the water. You're looking for the scent of other giant clams, the ones that made it before you. Their presence means the conditions are right. The water is clean. The food is good. It's like following a trail of breadcrumbs, except these breadcrumbs could mean the difference between life and death. Days pass. Your siblings around you are disappearing one by one. Some get eaten by fish that see them as nothing more than floating protein. Others simply run out of energy and sink into the depths, never to be seen again. The ocean doesn't care about your struggles. It's indifferent to whether you survive or not, but you keep going, driven by an instinct you don't understand but can't ignore. Then finally, you detect it. The chemical signature you've been searching for drifts through the water, faint but unmistakable. Other giant clams are nearby, somewhere below you. You don't have much time left, maybe hours at most, but you've found what you were looking for. Now comes the hardest part, getting there. You begin your descent, using what little energy you have left to propel yourself downward. The pressure increases as you sink deeper, and the light from the surface starts to fade. You're entering a different world now, one where the rules are completely different from the open ocean above. This is the reef, a bustling underwater city where every inch of space is fought over, where the strong survive and the weak disappear without a trace. As you get closer to the bottom, you start to see them. Massive shells, some as big as bathtubs, scattered across the sandy floor like ancient monuments. These are the giant clams that made it, the ones that found their spot and claimed it decades ago. They're your destination, your goal, your only hope for survival. But getting to them is just the beginning. The real challenge is finding a place among them where you can settle down. You drift lower, scanning the seafloor with your primitive senses. Every surface is already occupied. Corals spread their tentacles to claim territory. Sponges filter water through their porous bodies, competing for the same nutrients you'll need. Fish dart between the structures, ready to snap up anything small enough to swallow. This is not a welcoming place for something as vulnerable as you. But there, between two massive clamshells, you spot it. A small patch of sandy bottom, maybe the size of a coin, that seems to be unclaimed. It's not perfect, but it's available, and you're running out of options. You drift toward it, hoping nothing else notices the same spot you found. This is your moment of truth. If you can reach that patch of sand and successfully attach yourself to it, you might just survive. If not, you'll join the countless others who tried and failed. You touch down gently on the sandy surface, your tiny body barely making an impression. The sensation is strange after so many days floating freely in the water column. For the first time in your short life, you're stationary. This is it. This is where you'll spend the rest of your existence, however long that might be. There's no going back now, no changing your mind, no second chances. This small patch of ocean floor is your entire world from now on. The first thing you need to do is attach yourself properly. Using specialized glands, you begin secreting a strong adhesive that will permanently bond you to the substrate. It's irreversible. Once this process is complete, you'll never move again. The thought would be terrifying if you were capable of such emotions, but you're driven purely by instinct. This is what you were born to do. As the adhesive hardens, you start the next phase of your transformation. Your body begins producing calcium carbonate, the same material that makes up coral skeletons and seashells. It's a slow process at first, just a thin layer forming around your soft tissues. But this is the beginning of your shell, the armor that will protect you for the rest of your life. It's also your prison, the structure that will keep you locked in this one spot forever. The first few weeks are critical. You're still incredibly vulnerable, your shell nothing more than a paper-thin coating that could be easily crushed. Predators are everywhere, scanning the reef for easy targets like you. Crabs scuttle across the bottom, their claws ready to crack open anything they can find. Fish probe every crevice, looking for hidden meals. Even other filter feeders see you as competition for limited resources. But you have something they don't expect: rapid growth. Your shell thickens day by day, layer upon layer of calcium carbonate, building up like geological strata. What started as a fragile coating becomes a fortress, each new layer making you harder to crack, more difficult to dislodge. You're literally building yourself into the landscape, becoming part of the reef itself. Your feeding strategy is elegantly simple. You extend a specialized organ called a siphon into the water column, creating a current that draws plankton and organic particles toward your mouth. It's like having a permanent fishing net that never needs to be cast or retrieved. The water flows in, you filter out anything edible, and the clean water flows back out. It's efficient, effective, and requires no energy expenditure for hunting or chasing prey. The reef around you is constantly changing. New corals grow, old ones die, fish populations shift with the seasons. But you remain constant, a fixture in this underwater landscape. Your shell continues to grow, not just thicker, but larger as well. What started as something the size of a marble slowly expands to the size of a tennis ball, then a softball, then even larger. Your neighbors, the other giant clams, become familiar landmarks in your limited world. There's the ancient one to your left, its shell covered in a thick layer of algae and small corals that have made their home on its surface. It's been here longer than you can imagine, a testament to the longevity possible in this lifestyle. To your right sits a younger clam, probably only a few years older than you, its shell still relatively clean and bright. These neighbors aren't just company, they're competition. Every particle of food that drifts through the water is potentially contested. The more efficient you are at filtering, the more you grow, the stronger you become. It's a passive form of competition, but competition nonetheless. Your survival depends not just on finding food, but on finding it faster and more efficiently than those around you. The seasons bring changes to your underwater world. During certain times of the year, the water becomes thick with plankton blooms, providing abundant food for filter feeders like yourself. These are feast times when you can grow rapidly and build up energy reserves. But there are also lean periods when the water is clear and food scarce. During these times, you must survive on stored resources, your metabolism slowing to conserve the energy. Your shell continues its steady expansion, each growth ring marking another year of survival. The surface becomes increasingly complex, with ridges and furrows that help strengthen the structure while providing hiding places for small fish and invertebrates. You're becoming more than just a clam. You're becoming a habitat, a living reef structure that supports an entire community of smaller organisms. The colors of your mantle, the soft tissue visible when your shell opens, begin to develop their distinctive patterns. These aren't just for show, they serve a crucial purpose. Within your tissues live millions of symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae. These microscopic plants use sunlight to produce food through photosynthesis, sharing their surplus with you in exchange for a safe place to live and access to nutrients from your waste products. This partnership transforms you from a simple filter feeder into something more complex. You're no longer entirely dependent on capturing food from the water column. Your algae partners can produce sugar and oxygen, supplementing your diet and helping you grow faster than you could on filtering alone. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement that has evolved over millions of years, perfected through countless generations of trial and error. The presence of these algae also explains your growing need for sunlight. Unlike your ancestors, who lived in the deep ocean darkness, you've evolved to live in the bright, shallow waters of coral reefs. Your position on the seafloor isn't just about finding food and avoiding predators. It's about maximizing your exposure to the sun's rays that power your internal garden. As months turn to years, your world expands in some ways while remaining utterly fixed in others. Your shell grows larger, your filtration capacity increases, your algae population multiplies. You become more efficient at extracting nutrients from the water, better at converting sunlight into energy. But your physical location never changes. The small patch of sand where you first settled remains your entire universe, your perspective limited to what you can sense through chemical signals and water currents. The reef around you continues its endless cycle of growth and decay. New species arrive, establish themselves, and either thrive or disappear. Old residents die off, their skeletons becoming substrate for the next generation. Through it all, you remain, a constant presence growing steadily larger and more substantial with each passing year. Your relationship with the other clams becomes more complex as you grow. What started as simple competition for food particles evolves into something resembling cooperation. When predators approach, the vibrations through the water alert everyone in the neighborhood. Shells snap shut, almost simultaneously, creating a fortress of calcium carbonate that few creatures can penetrate. It's not planned coordination, just a shared response to danger, but it works. The threats change as you get bigger. Small crabs that once posed a real danger now bounce harmlessly off your thick shell, but new enemies emerge to take their place. Octopi probe your defenses with their intelligent tentacles, looking for weak spots where they might pry you open. They're patient hunters, willing to spend hours testing your shell for vulnerabilities. Most of the time, they give up and move on to easier prey. But the threat is always there. Storms bring their own challenges. The surge of water during tropical cyclones can dislodge smaller clams, sending them tumbling across the reef to their death. Your growing mass works in your favor here. The heavier you become, the more securely anchored you are to your chosen spot. What might uproot a younger clam barely shifts your substantial bulk. You've literally grown too big to be pushed around. Your shell develops personality as it expands. The growth rings tell the story of your life, like tree rings tell the story of a forest. Thick bands mark years of abundant food and ideal conditions. Thin lines record times of scarcity or stress. Scars show where predators tried and failed to crack your defenses. Each mark is a badge of survival, proof that you've endured another challenge in your unchanging yet ever-changing world. The algae living in your tissues become more sophisticated partners as time passes. They've learned to optimize their photosynthesis to match your daily rhythms. During peak sunlight hours, they work overtime, producing excess sugars that fuel your growth. At night, they slow their activity, conserving resources while you focus on filtering nutrients from the darkness. It's a partnership, refined over millions of years of evolution, and you're both benefiting from its perfection. Your size brings new responsibilities. Smaller fish begin using your massive shell as shelter, darting between your slightly opened valves when predators approach. You don't mind the company. Their presence actually helps you by stirring up the water around your siphons, making your filtering more efficient. They bring you nutrients in their waste, and you provide them protection. It's another symbiotic relationship, though less intimate than your partnership with the algae. The reef continues its endless transformation around you. Corals that were mere polyps when you first arrived have grown into massive structures. Fish populations shift with changing ocean conditions and human activities far above. New species arrive on currents from distant reefs, while others disappear, victims of changing temperatures or overfishing. Through it all, you remain constant, a living monument to persistence and adaptation. Your filtering capacity has increased dramatically as you've grown. What started as a tiny current, barely noticeable to other creatures, has become a significant force in your local ecosystem. You process thousands of gallons of water every day, removing particles and nutrients that might otherwise accumulate to harmful levels. You're not just surviving in this environment, you're actively improving it for everyone else. The chemical signals you can detect have become more sophisticated too. You can sense the approach of different types of predators from their unique molecular signatures. The mucus trail of a sea star triggers one type of response, while the scent of an octopus triggers another. You've learned to distinguish between the harmless passage of herbivorous fish and the purposeful hunting patterns of creatures that might see you as prey. Your reproductive system begins developing as you reach maturity. Unlike many creatures, you don't need to find a mate. You're equipped to produce both eggs and sperm, though not at the same time. This hermaphroditic strategy makes sense for an animal that can never move to find a partner. When the time comes, you'll release your genetic material into the water, hoping it finds eggs from other clams in your neighborhood. But reproduction is still years away. For now, you focus on growth and survival. Your shell continues expanding, each day adding microscopic layers to your protective fortress. The process is so gradual, you're not aware of it, but over months and years, the accumulation is substantial. You're becoming one of the reef's major landmarks, a structure that other creatures navigate by. The seasons bring predictable changes to your world. Certain times of year trigger massive plankton blooms that turn the water cloudy with food particles. During these periods, you feed almost continuously, your siphons working overtime to process the abundance. Your growth accelerates, and your energy reserves build up for the leaner times that always follow. Other seasons bring different challenges. Temperature fluctuations stress your algae partners, sometimes forcing you to expel them temporarily until conditions improve. Without their photosynthetic contribution, you rely entirely on filter feeding, which requires more energy and provides less nutrition. These periods test your resilience and your ability to survive on stored resources. The water chemistry around the reef fluctuates with tides, storms, and seasonal changes. Your shell building process is sensitive to these variations. When the water becomes too acidic, it becomes harder to extract the calcium carbonate you need for growth. When it's too basic, other problems arise. You've evolved mechanisms to cope with these fluctuations, but they still represent significant challenges to your long-term survival. Your neighborhood continues evolving as you grow. New clams occasionally settle nearby, their tiny forms barely visible against the sandy bottom. You remember being that small, that vulnerable, though the memory is more chemical than conscious. Some of these newcomers will make it, growing to join your community of filter feeders. Others will fall victim to predators, disease, or simple bad luck. The established clams around you show signs of their advancing age. Their shells are thick and heavy, covered with hitchhiking organisms that have made permanent homes on their surfaces. Small corals, sponges, and algae create miniature ecosystems on their backs. You're beginning to accumulate similar passengers, becoming not just a clam, but a living habitat supporting dozens of smaller species. Your position in the reef's hierarchy becomes more secure with each passing year. Younger clams settle in areas you've already filtered clean, benefiting from your processing of the water column. Older clams serve as windbreaks and current deflectors, creating calmer water zones where you can feed more efficiently. It's an unintentional community, but it functions with remarkable coordination. The human world above remains largely invisible to you, but its effects reach down into your domain. Changes in water temperature, chemistry, and clarity all stem from activities happening far from the reef. Pollution drifts down from the surface, sometimes in concentrations that stress your filtering systems. Boat anchors occasionally crash into the reef, destroying decades of growth in seconds. But these are abstract threats, problems you sense only through their effects on your immediate environment. Your daily routine has settled into predictable patterns. Dawn brings increased activity from your algae partners as sunlight penetrates the water. Your siphons extend to their fullest, creating maximum current flow for feeding. Midday brings peak photosynthesis, your tissues bright with the activity of millions of algae cells. Evening sees a gradual reduction in both filtering and photosynthesis as the reef prepares for night. Night brings its own rhythms. Many of the fish that shelter near you during the day venture out to feed in deeper waters. Nocturnal predators emerge from their hiding places, prowling the reef for careless prey. Your shell remains slightly open, continuing to filter the water column, but your responses become more cautious. Night is when most attacks happen, when predators have the advantage of darkness. Your growth continues, relentless and steady. What started as a microscopic larva has become a substantial presence on the reef floor. Your shell spans several feet now, heavy enough to resist all but the most determined predators. The ridges and valleys of your surface provide hiding places for small fish and invertebrates, making you a valued member of the reef community. The partnership with your algae has reached sophisticated levels of integration. They've adapted their reproduction cycles to match yours, ensuring that when you eventually spawn, they'll be ready to colonize your offspring. In return, you've modified your shell structure to optimize light penetration, giving them the best possible conditions for photosynthesis. It's evolution in action, two species becoming more perfectly matched with each generation. Your chemical communication with other clams has become more nuanced as well. You can detect subtle differences in the signals they emit, reading information about their health, reproductive status, and stress levels. This chemical gossip network keeps you informed about conditions throughout your neighborhood, helping you optimize your own responses to changing situations. The reef around you shows signs of maturity. The explosive growth phase that characterized its early years has given way to a more stable period of consolidation. Species composition has stabilized, with established residents holding their territories against newcomers. The physical structure has reached a size where it significantly influences local water currents and wave patterns. Your role in this mature ecosystem has evolved from simple survivor to essential component. Your filtering activities help maintain water quality for the entire community. Your shell provides habitat for dozens of species that couldn't survive without the shelter and surfaces you provide. Your waste products fertilize the algae and corals around you, contributing to the overall productivity of the reef. But maturity brings new challenges. The competition for space has intensified as the reef reaches its carrying capacity. Every surface is contested, every nutrient source claimed. Younger organisms struggle to find niches in this saturated environment, while established residents like yourself must defend resources they've held for years. It's a more subtle form of competition than the direct predation of your early life, but no less intense. Your shell continues to thicken and strengthen, but the growth rate has slowed compared to your explosive early years. This is normal for your species. The initial race to reach a safe size gives way to steady, sustainable growth that can continue for decades. You're building for longevity now, creating a fortress that will protect you through whatever challenges the future might bring. The water temperature begins to shift with the changing seasons, and you feel it immediately. Your algae partners are sensitive to these fluctuations, their photosynthetic rates dropping when the water gets too warm or too cold. During the hottest months, you sometimes have to expel portions of your algae population to prevent them from overwhelming your system. It's a harsh decision, but one that ensures your survival. The expelled algae drift away in the current, and you hope they'll find another host or somehow manage to survive on their own. When the water cools again, new algae arrive to repopulate your tissues. They're not exactly the same as the ones you lost. Each generation brings slight variations, subtle improvements that help both species adapt to changing conditions. It's evolution happening in real time, played out in the microscopic gardens living inside your body. You don't understand the process, but you benefit from it every day. The storms that sweep across the reef have become less threatening as you've grown, but they still bring challenges. The surge of water doesn't move you anymore, but it does stir up sediment from the bottom, clogging your filtering system with sand and debris. For days after a major storm, you have to work harder to extract nutrients from the murky water while expelling the unwanted particles that would otherwise accumulate in your tissues. These storm events also reshape your neighborhood in dramatic ways. Smaller corals get broken off and tumbled across the bottom. Fish populations scatter and regroup in new locations. Sometimes entire sections of the reef get restructured, creating new currents and changing the flow patterns you've grown accustomed to. You adapt to these changes because you have no choice, adjusting your filtering rhythm to match the altered water movement around you. Your reproductive organs are developing now, though the process is gradual and complex. Unlike creatures that mate in the traditional sense, you're preparing for a very different kind of reproduction. Your body is slowly becoming capable of producing both eggs and sperm, though not simultaneously. The timing has to be perfect. Too early, and the gametes won't be mature enough. Too late, and the seasonal conditions won't be right for larval survival. The chemical signals from other clams in your area become more important as sexual maturity approaches. You can detect subtle changes in their biochemistry that indicate their reproductive status. Some are already mature and have spawned multiple times. Others, like you, are approaching their first reproductive event. A few of the youngest clams won't be ready for years yet. This chemical communication network helps coordinate spawning events across the entire population. Your shell has developed distinctive characteristics that set you apart from your neighbors. The growth rings are uniquely yours, recording the specific conditions you've experienced over the years. Scars from predator attacks create permanent marks that tell the story of your survival. The hitchhiking organisms growing on your surface have created their own unique ecosystem, different from the communities living on other clams nearby. The fish that shelter around you have become almost like pets, though you have no concept of such relationships. They've learned your daily rhythms, knowing when you'll be feeding most actively and when you'll be more closed off. Some species have been with you for years, growing from juveniles to adults while using your shell as their home base. Others come and go with the seasons, but they all contribute to the dynamic community that has formed around your massive presence. Your filtering capacity has reached impressive levels. You're processing thousands of gallons of water every day, extracting microscopic particles with remarkable efficiency. The water that exits your siphons is noticeably cleaner than what enters, and this difference is measurable across the entire reef system. You and your fellow giant clams are living water treatment plants, maintaining the crystal clear conditions that allow coral reefs to thrive. The chemical composition of the water tells you stories about events happening far beyond your limited world. Runoff from distant rivers carries traces of terrestrial plants and soil. Currents from the deep ocean bring nutrients from the abyssal depths. Even the waste products of surface-dwelling creatures eventually make their way down to your level, providing information about the health of the entire marine ecosystem. Your algae partners have become incredibly sophisticated in their responses to daily light cycles. They begin ramping up photosynthesis before dawn, preparing for the first rays of sunlight to penetrate the water. Throughout the day, they adjust their activity levels to match the changing intensity and angle of the sun. By evening, they're already beginning to wind down, conserving energy for the dark hours ahead. This internal solar power system has transformed your entire biology. Unlike your ancestors, who depended entirely on filter feeding, you now derive a significant portion of your energy from photosynthesis. This partnership allows you to grow larger and live longer than would be possible through filtering alone. It's also made you dependent on clear, shallow water where sunlight can reach your tissues. The reef's predator-prey relationships continue to evolve around you. New species arrive periodically, testing the defenses of established residents, like yourself. Most bounce off your thick shell without causing damage, but some are persistent enough to probe for weaknesses. You've learned to recognize the approach patterns of different predators, closing your shell at the first sign of trouble. The octopi that occasionally visit your area have become more sophisticated in their hunting techniques. They've learned that direct assault on your shell is futile, so they try subtler approaches. Some attempt to slip their tentacles between your shell valves when you're feeding. Others try to create water currents that might disorient you or interfere with your filtering. None have succeeded yet, but their intelligence makes them potentially dangerous opponents. Your position on the reef has become more prominent as you've grown. What started as a small bump on the seafloor has become a significant geological feature. Currents now flow around you rather than over you, creating calm zones and turbulent areas that affect the entire local ecosystem. Smaller organisms use these current patterns to their advantage, positioning themselves in optimal locations for their own feeding and reproduction. The waste products you generate have become valuable resources for the reef community. Your feces provide nutrients for algae and corals growing nearby. The pseudofeces you produce, particles rejected during filtering, create small mounds that other organisms colonize. Even your mucus secretions are harvested by various creatures as food or building material. Nothing goes to waste in this efficient ecosystem. Your shell continues to thicken, but the growth has become more strategic. Instead of simply adding mass everywhere, your body now focuses on reinforcing areas that experience the most stress. The hinge region, where your shell valves meet, gets extra attention, as does the edge where predators are most likely to attempt entry. It's unconscious engineering, but remarkably effective. The seasonal cycles have become deeply embedded in your biology. Your metabolism slows during the cooler months when food is scarce and your algae partners are less active. During the warm season, everything accelerates: feeding, growth, and preparation for reproduction. These cycles are synchronized not just with temperature changes, but with the complex interplay of currents, nutrients, and light availability that characterizes your reef environment. Your neighborhood continues to change as older clams die and new ones settle. When a giant clam dies, it leaves behind a massive shell that becomes prime real estate for other organisms. These empty shells often become the foundation for new coral growth or shelter for fish populations. The death of one giant clam can reshape the local ecosystem for decades to come. You've witnessed several of these deaths over the years. Sometimes it's obvious: a shell that remains closed for days, eventually gaping open to reveal empty space inside. Other times it's more subtle: a gradual reduction in filtering activity, followed by the slow colonization of the shell by other organisms. Each death reminds you of your own mortality, though you process this information more as a chemical data than conscious thought. The younger clams that have settled near you face challenges you remember from your own early years. Predation pressure is intense for anything small enough to be easily crushed or swallowed. Competition for food particles is fierce when you're too small to create strong filtering currents. Many don't make it past their first year, but those that do grow rapidly, once they reach a critical size threshold. Your own survival to this point represents a remarkable achievement. The odds against any individual larva reaching maturity are astronomical. Disease, predation, storms, pollution, and simple bad luck eliminate the vast majority before they can reproduce. Your presence on this reef, your massive shell, your thriving algae population, all of it is testament to a combination of good genes, favorable conditions, and extraordinary luck. The partnership between you and your algae has reached levels of integration that blur the line between separate organisms. Your tissues have specialized structures designed specifically to house and nourish the algae. In return, they've modified their cellular machinery to optimize the transfer of nutrients to you. It's a level of cooperation that approaches the complexity seen in the cells of higher organisms. Your reproductive system is nearing full maturity now. The gonads developing inside your body will soon be capable of producing either eggs or sperm, depending on environmental conditions and timing. The process is controlled by a complex interplay of internal hormones and external chemical signals from other clams in your area. When the time comes, the spawning event will be carefully coordinated across the entire population. The reef around you shows signs of long-term stability mixed with constant, small-scale changes. The major structural elements, the large corals, the established clam beds, the permanent fish territories, remain consistent from year to year. But within this stable framework, there's constant flux. New species arrive, populations shift, and microhabitats evolve in response to changing conditions. Your role in this ecosystem has evolved from simple participant to keystone species. Your filtering activities maintain water quality for hundreds of other organisms. Your shell provides habitat for dozens of species that couldn't survive without the surfaces and shelter you provide. Your waste products fertilize the entire local food web. Remove you from the equation, and the entire character of this reef section would change dramatically. The human impact on your world has become more noticeable over the years, though you can't identify the source of these changes. Water temperatures fluctuate more dramatically than they used to. Chemical compositions shift in ways that stress your algae partners. Sedimentation events occur more frequently, clogging your filters and reducing the clarity of the water around you. These are abstract problems to you, environmental variables to adapt to, rather than consequences of distant human activities. Your shell has become a historical record of environmental conditions over the years. Each growth layer contains chemical signatures that reflect the water temperature, nutrient levels, and pollution exposure you experienced during that period. Scientists could read this record like tree rings, extracting detailed information about how reef conditions have changed over your lifetime. But you're unaware of this significance, focused only on the immediate challenges of survival and growth. The daily rhythm of your life has settled into patterns that will likely continue for decades. Dawn brings the awakening of your algae partners and the beginning of active filtering. Midday sees peak activity in both photosynthesis and nutrient extraction. Evening brings a gradual reduction in both processes as the reef prepares for night. These cycles are so deeply ingrained that they continue even when environmental conditions would normally disrupt them. Your chemical communication network has become sophisticated enough to detect subtle changes in the health and status of clams throughout your neighborhood. You can sense when one of your neighbors is stressed, diseased, or preparing for reproduction. This information helps you optimize your own responses to changing conditions and coordinate your activities with the broader community. The future stretches ahead of you, measured not in days or months, but in decades. If you can avoid the major catastrophes that occasionally sweep through reef systems, severe storms, disease outbreaks, dramatic temperature changes, you could live for 50 years or more. Your shell will continue growing, your algae population will evolve and adapt, and your role in the reef ecosystem will become even more integral to its function. But first, you must successfully reproduce. The chemical signals from your neighbors indicate that spawning season is approaching. Your body is preparing for its first reproductive event, a synchronized release of genetic material that will hopefully result in the next generation of giant clams. The timing must be perfect, the conditions optimal, and your gametes healthy and viable. Success means your genes will continue into the future. Failure means starting over with the next reproductive cycle, assuming you survive long enough to try again. The spawning season arrives with subtle changes you've been monitoring for weeks. Water temperature has reached the precise threshold your species requires, and the chemical signals from your neighbors confirm they're experiencing the same internal preparations you are. Your reproductive organs have swollen with genetic material, ready for release at exactly the right moment. This isn't something you can control consciously. It's driven by hormones and instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. The coordination required for successful reproduction is staggering. Every mature clam in your area must release their gametes within hours of each other, or the dilution effect of the ocean will make fertilization impossible. Too early, and you waste your contribution to the gene pool. Too late, and you miss the window entirely. The timing is controlled by a complex interaction of lunar cycles, water temperature, and chemical communication between individuals. You feel the pressure building inside your reproductive organs as the critical moment approaches. Your neighbors are experiencing the same sensations, their bodies preparing for the synchronized release that will flood the water column with eggs and sperm. The younger clams watch this process without participating, their bodies not yet mature enough to contribute. The oldest clams have been through this ritual dozens of times, their experience evident in the subtle chemical signals they emit. Then it happens. A cascade of hormonal triggers floods your system, and you begin releasing your genetic material into the water. The sensation is unlike anything you've experienced, a massive outpouring of cellular material that represents your biological investment in the future. Around you, your neighbors are doing the same, their contributions mixing with yours in the current. The water becomes cloudy with millions of eggs and sperm, creating a genetic soup that will determine the next generation. The spawning event lasts only a few hours, but its effects will ripple through the ecosystem for years. Most of the genetic material will be consumed by filter feeders or dispersed by currents before fertilization can occur. But some eggs will successfully merge with sperm from other clams, creating the microscopic larvae that will face the same challenges you survived years ago. The odds against any individual larva reaching maturity remain astronomical, but the sheer number released ensures that some will make it. Your body feels different after spawning. The massive energy expenditure has left you temporarily weakened, your filtering capacity reduced while you recover from the reproductive effort. Your algae partners sense this change and increase their photosynthetic activity to compensate, providing extra energy to help you through the recovery period. It's another example of how deeply integrated your partnership has become. They literally support you through your most vulnerable moments. The post-spawning period brings new challenges. Predators seem to sense your temporary weakness and probe your defenses more aggressively. Your shell responses are slightly slower, your chemical detection systems temporarily impaired by the hormonal changes still coursing through your system. But your neighbors are experiencing the same effects, and the community's collective vigilance helps protect everyone during this vulnerable time. Over the following weeks, you gradually return to normal function. Your filtering capacity recovers, your growth resumes, and your chemical communication systems recalibrate. The spawning event becomes a memory encoded in your tissues, a biological milestone that marks your transition from juvenile to fully mature adult. You've successfully contributed to the genetic diversity of your species, ensuring that your particular combination of traits has a chance to continue into the future. The reef around you begins showing signs of the spawning event's success. Tiny larvae drift through the water column, most too small to see but detectable through their chemical signatures. Some will settle nearby, becoming your new neighbors, if they survive the critical early months. Others will be carried far away by currents, potentially establishing new populations on distant reefs. A few might even find their way back to this same area years later, having completed an oceanic journey of thousands of miles. Your daily routine resumes its familiar patterns, but with new purpose. You're no longer just surviving and growing. You're now part of the reef's reproductive community, a contributor to the gene pool that will shape future generations. This status brings subtle changes in how other organisms interact with you. Some fish species seem to recognize mature clams and position themselves accordingly, perhaps benefiting from the chemical signals you now emit regularly. The seasonal cycles continue their eternal rhythm around you. The warm months that triggered your spawning gradually give way to cooler water and reduced food availability. Your metabolism slows accordingly, your algae partners reducing their activity to match the decreased sunlight and lower temperatures. These quiet periods are essential for recovery and preparation for the next active season. Your shell continues its relentless growth, but the pattern has changed since reaching sexual maturity. More energy now goes toward maintaining reproductive readiness rather than pure structural expansion. The shell still thickens and strengthens, but at a more measured pace that reflects your new biological priorities. Each growth ring now carries chemical markers indicating your reproductive status, a record that could be read by others of your species if they possess the ability to analyze such data. The community of hitchhiking organisms living on your shell has reached impressive diversity. Small corals have established permanent colonies on your upper surfaces, their polyps feeding on particles stirred up by your filtering activities. Sponges fill the spaces between coral colonies, their own filtering systems complementing yours in processing the water column. Algae cover any remaining surfaces, adding their photosynthetic contribution to the local energy budget. This living ecosystem on your shell has become so complex that it supports its own food webs. Small crustaceans graze on the algae, while fish hunt the crustaceans, and larger predators hunt the fish. Your shell has become a miniature reef within the larger reef, a three-dimensional habitat supporting dozens of species that couldn't survive without the foundation you provide. You're unaware of most of these relationships, focused on your own survival and growth. The water quality around the reef fluctuates with global patterns you can't comprehend. Ocean currents bring nutrients from deep water during some seasons, while surface heating creates stratified layers during others. Your filtering systems adapt automatically to these changes, adjusting their efficiency and selectivity based on what's available in the water column. When nutrients are abundant, you filter more aggressively. When they're scarce, you become more selective about what you process. Your algae partners have evolved their own responses to these fluctuations. During nutrient-rich periods, they reproduce rapidly, increasing their population within your tissues to take advantage of the favorable conditions. When nutrients become limiting, they focus on efficiency rather than growth, optimizing their photosynthetic machinery to extract maximum energy from reduced sunlight and chemical resources. The reef's predator community continues evolving around established residents like yourself. New species occasionally arrive, testing the defenses of everything they encounter. Most quickly learn that attacking mature giant clams is futile, but some persist in their efforts. You've developed increasingly sophisticated responses to these threats, recognizing not just the presence of predators, but their specific hunting patterns and preferred attack methods. Your chemical communication abilities have reached remarkable sophistication. You can distinguish between the stress signals of different neighbor clams, identifying which ones are under attack, which are diseased, and which are simply responding to environmental changes. This information helps you optimize your own responses and contributes to the collective defense network that protects the entire clam community. The younger clams that settled near you several years ago are now approaching their own sexual maturity. You can detect the chemical changes in their tissues as their reproductive systems develop. Some will participate in the next spawning event, adding their genetic contribution to the community pool. Others need another year or two of growth before they're ready. Their presence ensures continuity for the local population, even if some of the older clams don't survive future challenges. Your neighborhood has stabilized into a mature community with established territories and predictable interaction patterns. The fish that shelter around you have learned your daily rhythms so well they anticipate your activities. When you begin your morning filtering routine, they position themselves to take advantage of the particles you stir up. When you close your shell in response to threats, they immediately seek alternative shelter among the corals and crevices nearby. The larger ecosystem processes continue around you with seasonal regularity. Plankton blooms create feeding bonanzas, followed by periods of scarcity. Temperature fluctuations stress some species while benefiting others. Storm systems reshape the physical structure of the reef, creating new habitats while destroying others. Through all these changes, you remain constant, a living landmark that provides stability in an ever-changing environment. Your waste products have become integral to the local nutrient cycling. The feces you produce fertilize algae and corals growing nearby, while your pseudofeces create small mounds that other organisms colonize. Even your mucus secretions are harvested by various creatures as food or building material. The efficiency of this recycling system means nothing goes to waste. Every byproduct of your metabolism becomes a resource for other species. The storms that periodically sweep across the reef no longer threaten your survival directly, but they still create significant challenges. The turbulence stirs up sediment that clogs your filtering systems, forcing you to work harder to extract nutrients while expelling unwanted particles. The changes in current patterns can persist for weeks after a storm passes, requiring constant adjustments to your feeding strategy. Your shell has become a historical archive of environmental conditions, each growth layer containing chemical signatures that reflect the water temperature, pollution levels, and nutrient availability you experienced during that period. The trace elements incorporated into your shell structure create a detailed record that scientists could potentially read to understand how reef conditions have changed over your lifetime. But you remain focused on immediate survival rather than historical significance. The partnership with your algae has reached levels of integration that approach the complexity seen in multicellular organisms. Your tissues have developed specialized structures for housing and nourishing the algae, while they've modified their cellular machinery to optimize nutrient transfer to you. The relationship has become so intimate that neither partner could survive without the other. You've essentially become a single superorganism composed of two different species. Your filtering capacity has stabilized at impressive levels. You process thousands of gallons of water daily, extracting microscopic particles with remarkable efficiency. The cumulative effect of your activities, combined with those of your neighbors, maintains the crystal clear water conditions that allow the entire reef ecosystem to thrive. You're part of a living filtration system that keeps the marine environment healthy for hundreds of other species. The reproductive cycles of your community have become synchronized over the years. The chemical communication network ensures that spawning events are coordinated across the entire population, maximizing the chances of successful fertilization. Your own reproductive system has matured to the point where you can participate in these events regularly, contributing your genetic material to each new generation of potential colonists. Your position in the reef hierarchy has solidified through years of successful survival and growth. Younger organisms seek shelter in the calm water zones created by your massive shell, while your filtering activities benefit the entire community by maintaining water quality. Your death would create a significant gap in the ecosystem, both literally, in terms of the physical space you occupy, and functionally, in terms of the services you provide to other species. The human impact on your environment has become more pronounced over the years, though you can only detect it through changes in water chemistry and temperature. Ocean acidification makes it harder to extract the calcium carbonate needed for shell growth. Rise in temperatures stress your algae partners, sometimes forcing you to expel them temporarily until conditions improve. Pollution creates additional challenges for your filtering systems, requiring more energy to process contaminated water. Your daily existence has settled into rhythms that will likely continue for decades. The partnership with your algae provides a steady energy source supplemented by filter feeding. Your massive shell offers protection from all but the most determined predators. Your positions in the reef community is secure, supported by years of successful interaction with neighbors and hitchhikers. Barring catastrophic events, you could continue this lifestyle for many more years. But the ocean is never truly predictable. Climate change brings new challenges that your species has never faced before. Ocean chemistry is shifting in ways that make shell building more difficult. Temperature fluctuations are becoming more extreme, stressing the delicate balance between you and your algae partners. New diseases are emerging as species ranges shift and previously isolated pathogens find new hosts. Your survival depends on your ability to adapt to these changing conditions. The genetic diversity created by regular spawning events provides the raw material for evolution, but the pace of environmental change may be faster than your species can adapt. You're part of an ancient lineage that has survived ice ages and mass extinctions, but the current rate of change represents an unprecedented challenge. The reef around you shows signs of stress that mirror the larger changes happening throughout the world's coral reef systems. Some coral species are struggling with the warming water, their own algae partnerships breaking down under thermal stress. Fish populations are shifting as their preferred temperature ranges move toward the poles. New species are arriving from warmer waters, while cold-adapted species are disappearing from the area. Your role as a living water treatment plant becomes more critical as these stresses increase. Your filtering activities so help maintain water quality even as pollution and sedimentation increase. Your algae partners contribute oxygen to the water while removing carbon dioxide, helping to buffer the effects of ocean acidification. Your presence stabilizes the local environment for dozens of other species that might otherwise be unable to cope with changing conditions. The spawning events continue on their ancient schedule, but with new uncertainties. The larvae you help produce face challenges your generation never encountered. The water they must survive in during their vulnerable early stages is more acidic, warmer, and more polluted than it was when you were drifting through the ocean as a microscopic speck. Some will adapt to these new conditions, while others will fail to develop properly or find suitable places to settle. Your shell continues growing, adding new layers that record the changing chemistry of the ocean around you. Future scientists might read these layers like pages in a book, tracking the acceleration of environmental change through your lifetime. Each ring tells a story of survival against increasing odds, of adaptation to conditions that are shifting faster than evolution can keep pace with. The community of organisms living on your shell has become remarkably resilient, adapting to the same environmental stresses you face. Some species have disappeared, unable to cope with the changing conditions. Others have arrived as refugees from degraded reefs elsewhere. The diversity remains high, but the composition is constantly shifting as species respond to environmental pressures. Your partnership with your algae faces new challenges as ocean conditions continue changing. The delicate balance that has sustained this relationship for millions of years is being tested by rapid shifts in temperature, chemistry, and light availability. When conditions become too stressful, you're forced to expel your algae partners, a survival strategy that works in the short term but leaves you dependent entirely on filter feeding until new algae can colonize your tissues. The reef's future depends partly on the survival of keystone species like yourself. Your continued presence provides stability and essential services that support the entire ecosystem. But your own survival depends on your ability to adapt to conditions that are changing faster than your species has ever experienced. You're part of an evolutionary experiment happening in real time, with outcomes that will determine the future of coral reef ecosystems worldwide. The changes happening around you accelerate as years pass. Your algae partners, those microscopic tenants that have shared your body for so long, begin showing signs of stress more frequently. During the hottest months, their populations crash without warning, leaving you pale and weak until new colonists arrive. The recovery periods grow longer each time, and you find yourself relying more heavily on filter feeding to make up for the lost photosynthetic energy. Your neighborhood experiences its first major bleaching event during your 15th year. The water temperature spikes beyond anything you've experienced before, staying elevated for weeks. One by one, your neighbors begin expelling their algae, their massive shells turning ghostly white against the sandy bottom. You try to hold on to yours, but the stress becomes unbearable. The algae that have powered your growth for over a decade are literally cooking inside your tissues. You have no choice but to release them. The process is agonizing, not physically painful since you lack the nerve structures for such sensations, but metabolically devastating. Your energy production plummets overnight. Your filtering capacity drops as you struggle to maintain basic functions on stored reserves alone. Around you, the reef transforms into an alien landscape of bleached coral and empty clam shells, their former occupants reduced to calcium carbonate monuments. Some of your neighbors don't survive the bleaching event. Their shells gape open after weeks without their algae partners, the soft tissues inside dissolving into the water column. Scavengers move in quickly to claim the empty shells, but these structures will never again contribute to the reef's living processes. Each death represents decades of growth and community integration, lost in a matter of weeks. You endure through sheer stubbornness and luck. Your massive size provides enough stored energy to survive longer than smaller clams, and your established position gives you access to the best filtering opportunities. While slowly, painfully, new algae begin colonizing your tissues. They're different from your original partners. These come from warmer waters, carried by currents from reefs that have already adapted to higher temperatures. The integration process with these new algae is awkward at first. They don't sync perfectly with your daily rhythms, and their photosynthetic efficiency is lower than what you're used to, but they're more heat tolerant, and as the months pass, you both adapt to each other. Your tissues modify their structure to better accommodate the newcomers, while they adjust their metabolism to match your needs. It's evolution in fast forward, driven by necessity rather than gradual selection. Your shell growth slows dramatically during the recovery period. The energy that once went into adding new layers now focuses entirely on basic survival and algae integration. The growth rings from this period will be thin and stressed, permanent markers of the environmental catastrophe you survived. Future generations might read these rings as evidence of when the ocean crossed a critical threshold. The reef community that emerges from the bleaching event is fundamentally different from what existed before. Many coral species disappear entirely, replaced by hardier varieties that can tolerate higher temperatures. Fish populations shift as their preferred habitat structures vanish. The intricate relationships that took decades to establish are shattered and must be rebuilt from scratch. Your role in this new ecosystem becomes even more critical. With fewer filter feeders surviving the bleaching event, your continued presence helps maintain water quality for the struggling survivors. Your shell provides crucial habitat for displaced species searching for new homes. The calm water zones you create become refuges where stressed organisms can recover from the environmental trauma. New species arrive regularly now, refugees from reefs that have collapsed entirely under the pressure of changing conditions. Some integrate successfully into your community, while others struggle to find appropriate niches in the altered ecosystem. The constant flux creates opportunities for aggressive colonizers while making life difficult for specialized species that require stable conditions. Your reproductive cycles become increasingly important as the local population struggles to maintain genetic diversity. Each spawning event now carries extra significance, as the larvae produced must not only survive the traditional challenges of early life, but also adapt to environmental conditions that continue shifting. The synchronized spawning that once seemed automatic now requires more precise coordination as temperature cues become unreliable. The chemical communication network between surviving clams takes on new urgency. Information about water conditions, food availability, and stress levels spreads quickly through the community. When one clam detects dangerous temperature spikes or chemical changes, the warning propagates rapidly, allowing others to close their shells and reduce their metabolic activity before the stress peaks. Your algae partners continue evolving within your tissues, each generation slightly better adapted to the new normal of higher temperatures and altered water chemistry. Some produce different pigments that protect against increased UV radiation. Others modify their photosynthetic pathways to work more efficiently in the changed conditions. You benefit from these improvements, but the constant adaptation requires energy that once went toward growth and reproduction. The storms that sweep across your reef become more intense and frequent. The warmer ocean temperatures fuel stronger hurricanes that generate massive waves and surge events. Your increased size helps you survive these battering sessions, but the repeated stress takes its toll. Cracks appear in your shell where none existed before, requiring precious energy to repair and reinforce. The sediment stirred up by these intense storms stays suspended longer than it used to, turning the water murky for weeks at a time. Your filtering systems work overtime to process the contaminated water, but the constant exposure to abrasive particles wears down your delicate tissues. The efficiency of your feeding decreases even as your energy requirements increase. Ocean acidification adds another layer of stress to your daily existence. The chemical changes make it increasingly difficult to extract calcium carbonate from the water, slowing your shell growth and weakening the structure you depend on for protection. Each new layer requires more energy to produce, and the resulting shell is more susceptible to dissolution in the increasingly corrosive seawater. Your waste products become even more valuable to the struggling reef community. The nutrients you release support algae and coral growth in an environment where these resources are increasingly scarce. The small mounds created by your pseudofeces become critical habitat for juvenile organisms that can't find suitable homes elsewhere. Your contribution to nutrient cycling helps maintain productivity even as other sources decline. The hitchhiking community living on your shell adapts to the changing conditions with varying degrees of success. Some species disappear entirely, unable to cope with the environmental stress. Others thrive in the altered conditions, rapidly colonizing the vacant spaces left by their predecessors. The diversity remains high, but the turnover rate accelerates as species struggle to establish stable populations. Your daily rhythms must constantly adjust to changing light conditions as water clarity fluctuates with increased sedimentation and algae blooms. Your algae partners try to maintain their photosynthetic schedules, but frequent disruptions reduce their overall efficiency. The partnership that once ran like clockwork now requires constant fine-tuning to maintain basic functionality. The fish community around you shows increasing signs of stress as their preferred temperature ranges shift poleward. Some species that have sheltered around your shell for years begin moving to deeper, cooler waters. Others arrive from warmer regions, bringing different behaviors and requirements that disrupt established interaction patterns. The constant flux makes it difficult to maintain the stable relationships that once characterized your neighborhood. New diseases appear with alarming frequency as stressed organisms become more susceptible to infection and as pathogens expand their ranges into previously unsuitable habitats. You observe other clams succumbing to mysterious ailments that cause their shells to weaken and their tissues to deteriorate. The chemical signals from diseased neighbors carry warnings about threats you've never encountered before. Your own immune system, such as it is, works overtime to resist these emerging pathogens. The stress of constant environmental change makes you more vulnerable to infection, but your size and established position provide some protection. The thick shell you've built over decades creates a formidable barrier, while your massive tissue reserves help you survive periods when disease reduces your feeding efficiency. The spawning events of your community become increasingly unpredictable as traditional environmental cues fail to provide reliable timing signals. Temperature thresholds that once triggered reproduction now occur at different times or not at all. Lunar cycles remain constant, but other factors that influence spawning readiness shift with the changing ocean conditions. Coordination becomes more difficult, reducing the success rate of fertilization events. When spawning does occur, the larvae face challenges your generation never encountered. The water they must navigate during their vulnerable planktonic stage is more acidic, making it harder for them to build their initial shell structures. The chemical cues they use to locate suitable settlement sites are disrupted by pollution and altered water chemistry. Many drift longer than normal, exhausting their energy reserves before finding appropriate homes. Those larvae that do successfully settle face immediate challenges from the altered reef environment. Competition for space is more intense as suitable habitat becomes scarce. The established communities they try to join are less stable and more prone to disruption. Survival rates plummet compared to historical norms, making each successful recruitment even more precious for maintaining population viability. Your contribution to these spawning events becomes increasingly vital as fewer clams reach reproductive maturity. Your genetic material, tested by decades of survival in challenging conditions, carries valuable adaptations that might help future generations cope with continuing environmental change. Each reproductive event represents not just biological imperative, but a crucial investment in your species' evolutionary future. The reef's physical structure continues deteriorating as framework-building corals struggle with the changing conditions. The three-dimensional complexity that provides habitat for countless species slowly collapses into rubble fields. Your shell becomes an increasingly important structural element, one of the few remaining features that provides vertical relief and habitat diversity in the flattening landscape. The collapse of reef structure affects water flow patterns around your position. Currents that once moved predictably now shift with each storm event as the seafloor topography changes. You must constantly adjust your filtering strategy to accommodate these altered flow patterns, sometimes finding yourself in dead zones where water movement is insufficient for efficient feeding. Your algae partners face additional stress as the reef's declining health reduces water quality. Increased nutrients from dying organisms fuel algae blooms that block sunlight, while pollution from terrestrial runoff introduces toxins that interfere with photosynthesis. The delicate balance that sustains your partnership becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as multiple stressors interact in unpredictable ways. The larger ecosystem processes that once operated with seasonal regularity become chaotic and unpredictable. Plankton blooms occur at unexpected times or fail to materialize when expected. Upwelling events that bring nutrients from deep water shift in intensity and timing. The biological calendar that guided reef life for millions of years becomes unreliable as climate patterns reorganize around new equilibrium states. Your survival strategy shifts from growth-focused to resilience-focused as the environment becomes less predictable. Instead of maximizing size and reproductive output, you now prioritize maintaining basic functions and surviving repeated stress events. Energy allocation changes to favor repair and maintenance over expansion, reflecting the new reality of life in a rapidly changing ocean. The community of organisms that depends on you becomes more transient as species struggle to maintain stable populations. The fish that once used your shell as a permanent home base now move more frequently, following shifting resource availability. The invertebrates that colonized your surface show higher turnover rates as environmental stress makes long-term establishment more difficult. Your chemical communication with neighbors takes on new dimensions as the reef community adapts to increased uncertainty. Information about changing conditions becomes more valuable, and the ability to rapidly share warnings about environmental threats proves crucial for community survival. The network of chemical signals that connects the Clam community becomes a vital early warning system for emerging dangers. The older clams in your neighborhood, those that have survived multiple decades of environmental change, become repositories of biological memory. Their tissues carry genetic and epigenetic markers that record responses to past stress events. When similar conditions arise, these markers can be activated to help cope with familiar threats, providing a form of environmental memory that spans decades. Your own tissues begin developing these stress response mechanisms as repeated exposure to challenging conditions leaves permanent marks on your cellular machinery. Heat shock proteins become more abundant, helping you survive temperature spikes. Antioxidant systems strengthen to cope with increased metabolic stress. Your biology becomes increasingly militarized against an environment that grows more hostile each year. The spawning success of your community becomes a critical indicator of the raph's overall health. Years with successful reproduction suggest that conditions remain within tolerable limits for your species. Spawning failures indicate that environmental stress has crossed critical thresholds. Your reproductive output becomes a barometer for ecosystem stability. As ocean conditions continue deteriorating, your survival becomes increasingly dependent on your ability to exploit brief windows of favorable conditions. When temperature spikes subside, you must rapidly rebuild your algae populations and restore your filtering capacity. When storms pass, you must quickly repair damage and resume normal function before the next disruption arrives. Your massive shell, built over decades of steady growth, becomes increasingly important as a refuge for biodiversity. The complex surfaces and internal spaces you provide shelter dozens of species that might otherwise disappear from the degraded reef. Your death would represent not just the loss of an individual organism, but the collapse of an entire micro-ecosystem that has no alternative habitat available. The partnership with your algae partners becomes a model for the kind of rapid adaptation required for survival in the changing ocean. Both organisms must constantly adjust their biology to maintain their relationship under shifting conditions. The success of this partnership offers hope that some reef organisms can evolve quickly enough to keep pace with environmental change. Your filtering activities become even more critical as other water treatment mechanisms fail. The decline of coral coverage reduces the reef's ability to process nutrients and maintain water quality. Your continued operation as a biological filtration system helps maintain livable conditions for the remaining community members, making your survival essential for ecosystem function. The frequency of stress events increases to the point where recovery periods become insufficient for full restoration of normal function. You exist in a state of chronic stress, constantly adapting to new challenges while never fully recovering from previous ones. This chronic stress accelerates aging processes and reduces your overall resilience to future shocks. Your neighborhood becomes a laboratory for rapid evolution as organisms adapt to unprecedented conditions. New genetic variants appear regularly, tested immediately by the harsh environment. Most fail, but those that succeed spread rapidly through populations desperate for any advantage in the struggle for survival. You witness evolution accelerating to match the pace of environmental change. The reef's transformation from a stable, diverse ecosystem to a dynamic, simplified one occurs within your lifetime. The complex food webs and intricate species interactions that characterize the mature reef give way to simpler relationships between fewer, more resilient species. You become part of a biological community that prioritizes survival over diversity. Your continued existence represents a bridge between the reef that was and whatever it might become. Your tissues carry genetic information from the stable past, while your ongoing adaptations reflect the uncertain future. Your survival strategy, tested by decades of environmental challenge, might provide insights for how reef organisms can persist through continued change. The spawning events of your later years carry special significance as they may represent the last opportunities for your genetic lineage to contribute to future generations. Each reproductive event becomes precious, not just for maintaining population numbers, but for preserving the adaptive potential that might help your species survive whatever changes lie ahead. The decades blur together in cycles of survival and adaptation. Your shell has reached massive proportions now, spanning nearly 4 feet across and weighing hundreds of pounds. You've become a geological feature of the reef, as permanent and immovable as the coral formations around you. Fish generations have come and gone, using your shell as their landmark, their ancestral home base passed down through genetic memory. Your algae partners have evolved into something your original colonists would barely recognize. Heat-adapted strains dominate your tissues now, their modified pigments creating patterns of color that shift with the seasons. They've learned to shut down photosynthesis during temperature spikes, entering dormancy states that let both of you survive conditions that would have been lethal to your ancestors. The partnership has become a masterclass in rapid evolution, 2 species reshaping their biology in real time. The reef around you bears little resemblance to the thriving ecosystem you settled into decades ago, where diverse coral gardens once created underwater forests, simplified communities of hardy survivors now dominate the landscape. The three-dimensional complexity has collapsed into two-dimensional rubble fields, punctuated by occasional living structures, like yourself. You've watched entire coral species disappear from your neighborhood, their absence leaving gaps in the ecosystem that may never be filled. Your filtering capacity has become legendary among the remaining community members. You process nearly 10,000 gallons of water daily now, your massive siphons creating currents that can be felt hundreds of feet away. The water that exits your system is measurably cleaner than what enters, and this difference has become critical for maintaining livable conditions in an increasingly polluted ocean. You're not just surviving in this degraded environment, you're actively improving it for everyone else. The chemical communication network between surviving clams has evolved into something approaching telepathy. You can detect the stress levels of neighbors miles away, their molecular signals carrying detailed information about local conditions. When one clam begins expelling its algae, the warning spreads instantly through the network, allowing others to prepare for incoming temperature spikes. This early warning system has become essential for community survival. Your reproductive cycles have adapted to the new reality of unpredictable environmental conditions. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions that may never come, you've learned to spawn during brief windows of opportunity. Your gametes are hardier now, capable of surviving in more acidic water and developing successfully at higher temperatures. The larvae you help produce carry genetic modifications that would have been impossible just decades ago. The spawning events themselves have become community-wide celebrations of persistence. When conditions align well enough to trigger reproduction, every surviving clam participates with desperate intensity. The water becomes thick with genetic material as the entire population invests everything in creating the next generation. These events are rarer now, but more precious because of their scarcity. Your shell has become a living archive of environmental change. Each growth layer contains a chemical record of the conditions you experienced during that period. The early layers, formed during stable times, show regular patterns and consistent chemistry. The recent layers tell a different story: irregular growth, stress markers, and chemical signatures that speak of an ocean in chaos. Scientists could read your shell like a history book of climate change. The hitchhiking community living on your surface has simplified dramatically. Where dozens of species once competed for space on your shell, now only the hardiest survivors remain. But these species have become incredibly specialized, filling every available niche with remarkable efficiency. A complex food web operates on your back, sustained by the particles you stir up and the waste products you generate. Your daily rhythms have become more flexible as environmental conditions grow less predictable. Your algae partners no longer follow strict light cycles, instead responding dynamically to whatever conditions they encounter. During cloudy periods, they increase their efficiency to capture every available photon. During clear spells, they protect themselves from excessive radiation while maximizing energy production. The storms that batter your reef have reached intensities that would have been unthinkable when you first settled. Hurricane-force winds drive waves that can shift entire sections of the seafloor, but your massive bulk keeps you anchored through even the most violent events. You've become a stable reference point in a landscape that shifts with every major storm, a biological lighthouse that helps other organisms navigate the chaos. Your waste products have become precious commodities in the nutrient-poor environment. The feces you produce fertilize algae gardens that support entire food webs. Your pseudofeces create habitat mounds that house communities of small organisms. Even your mucus secretions are harvested by desperate creatures seeking any available nutrition source. Nothing you produce goes unused in this resource-limited world. The predator community around you has simplified along with everything else. Many of the specialized hunters that once prowled the reef have disappeared, unable to find their preferred prey species. The survivors are generalists, capable of exploiting whatever food sources remain available. Your massive shell makes you immune to most of these predators, but you've watched them adapt their hunting strategies to target smaller, more vulnerable prey. Your partnership with your algae faces constant challenges as water quality continues deteriorating. Pollution events that would have been occasional disruptions in the past now occur regularly, forcing you to expel your partners repeatedly. The recovery periods grow longer each time, and you find yourself spending more energy on basic survival and less on growth or reproduction. The younger clams that occasionally manage to settle in your area face challenges that seem almost insurmountable. The larval survival rate has dropped to a fraction of historical levels, making each successful recruitment a minor miracle. Those that do make it through their vulnerable early stages grow differently than your generation did, their shells thicker and their metabolisms more conservative from the start. Your chemical sensing abilities have become incredibly sophisticated as you've learned to detect an ever-expanding array of environmental threats. You can identify different types of pollution from their molecular signatures, distinguish between natural temperature fluctuations and anthropogenic warming events, and even detect the approach of disease outbreaks before they become visible. This sensory evolution has been essential for navigating an increasingly dangerous world. The reef's physical structure continues collapsing around you, but your presence helps stabilize whatever remains. Your massive shell deflects currents and waves, creating calm zones where other organisms can establish themselves. The complex surfaces you provide support more biodiversity per square foot than almost anywhere else on the degraded reef. You've become a living monument to what the ecosystem once was. Your energy allocation strategies have shifted dramatically as conditions have worsened. Where you once invested heavily in growth and reproduction, you now prioritize repair and maintenance systems. Your tissues contain high concentrations of protective compounds that help you survive repeated stress events. Your metabolism has become incredibly efficient, squeezing maximum benefit from every calorie you consume. The spawning coordination that once seemed automatic now requires sophisticated chemical communication. Temperature cues have become unreliable, lunar signals are obscured by changing water clarity, and traditional timing mechanisms fail regularly. The surviving clams must actively negotiate spawning schedules through complex chemical dialogues that can take weeks to resolve. Your reproductive output has become increasingly important as the local population dwindles. Each spawning event might be your last chance to contribute your genetic material to future generations. The pressure to reproduce successfully has intensified your investment in each reproductive cycle, even as the environmental challenges make success less likely. The diseases that periodically sweep through your community have become more virulent and frequent. Your immune system, strengthened by decades of exposure to various pathogens, provides some protection, but you've watched neighbors succumb to ailments that spread with alarming speed. The chemical signals from diseased clams carry information about symptoms and progression, helping healthy individuals prepare their defenses. Your contribution to water filtration has become essential for maintaining the reef's basic habitability. The collapse of coral coverage has eliminated much of the natural water processing capacity, leaving filter feeders like yourself as the primary mechanism for maintaining water quality. Your continued operation keeps nutrient levels within tolerable ranges for the struggling community. The seasonal cycles that once provided predictable structure to reef life have become chaotic and unreliable. Temperature patterns shift without warning, nutrient availability fluctuates wildly, and biological processes that should be synchronized now occur at random intervals. Your survival depends on your ability to respond quickly to whatever conditions arise rather than following predetermined biological programs. Your algae partners have developed remarkable stress tolerance mechanisms that benefit both of you. They can survive temperature spikes that would have killed their ancestors, recover from bleaching events more quickly, and maintain photosynthetic function under conditions that once would have shut down their systems entirely. This resilience has been crucial for maintaining your energy supply during increasingly frequent stress events. The reef's transformation from a complex, stable ecosystem to a simple, dynamic one has occurred entirely within your lifetime. You've witnessed the disappearance of species that seemed permanent fixtures of the underwater landscape. You've seen the collapse of food webs that appeared unshakable. You've survived the transition from abundance to scarcity, from stability to chaos. Your neighborhood has become a refuge for species that have been displaced from degraded areas elsewhere. Migrants arrive regularly, carrying genetic diversity from distant populations and bringing news of conditions in other reef systems. Some integrate successfully into your community, while others move on after brief stays. The constant flux prevents the establishment of stable, long-term relationships. The chemical environment of your reef has changed dramatically as ocean chemistry shifts with climate change. The water is more acidic now, making shell building increasingly difficult and expensive. Trace elements that were once abundant have become scarce, while pollutants that were once rare now appear regularly. Your filtering systems must constantly adapt to process this changing chemical soup. Your shell growth has slowed to nearly imperceptible rates as more energy goes toward basic survival rather than structural expansion. The growth rings from recent years are thin and stressed, bearing chemical markers that tell the story of environmental degradation. These layers will serve as evidence for future scientists studying the pace and impact of anthropogenic climate change. The spawning success of your community has become a critical indicator of ecosystem health. Years with successful reproduction suggest that conditions remain within the tolerance limits of your species. Spawning failures indicate that environmental stress has crossed critical thresholds. Your reproductive output has become a barometer for the reef's overall condition. Your survival represents a bridge between the reef that was and whatever it might become. Your tissues carry genetic information from more stable times, while your ongoing adaptations reflect the challenges of an uncertain future. Your persistence through decades of environmental change provides hope that some reef organisms can adapt quickly enough to survive continued degradation. The partnership between you and your algae has become a model for the kind of rapid coevolution required for survival in a changing world. Both organisms have modified their biology repeatedly to maintain their relationship under shifting conditions. The success of this partnership demonstrates that some biological relationships are flexible enough to persist through environmental transformation. Your filtering activities have become even more critical as other ecosystem services fail. The reef's natural ability to process nutrients and maintain water quality has declined dramatically with the loss of coral coverage. Your continued operation as a biological treatment system helps maintain livable conditions for the remaining community members, making your survival essential for ecosystem function. The frequency of environmental stress events has increased to the point where you rarely experience truly normal conditions. You exist in a state of chronic adaptation, constantly adjusting your biology to cope with new challenges while never fully recovering from previous ones. This permanent stress state has become the new normal for life on your reef. Your chemical communication abilities have evolved to match the complexity of your changing environment. You can now detect and interpret dozens of different molecular signals, each carrying specific information about environmental conditions or community status. This sophisticated sensing network has become essential for coordinating responses to rapidly changing situations. The reef community that has emerged from decades of environmental pressure bears little resemblance to the diverse ecosystem you originally joined. Simplified food webs connect fewer species in more direct relationships. Specialized organisms have been replaced by generalists capable of exploiting multiple resources. The intricate ecological relationships that once characterized mature reefs have given way to more basic survival strategies. Your continued existence has become increasingly unlikely with each passing year, yet you persist through a combination of size, experience, and sheer biological stubbornness. Your massive shell provides protection from physical damage. Your accumulated knowledge helps you navigate environmental challenges, and your partnerships with other organisms create support networks that enhance your survival prospects. The spawning events of your later years carry special significance as they represent potentially final opportunities for your genetic lineage to contribute to future generations. Each reproductive cycle becomes precious, not just for maintaining population numbers, but for preserving the adaptive innovations that might help your species survive, whatever changes lie ahead. Your role as a living repository of reef history becomes more important as the pace of environmental change accelerates. Your tissues contain biological records of conditions that no longer exist, genetic adaptations to challenges that have been superseded by new threats, and physiological responses to environmental states that may never return. You represent a library of biological information that could prove crucial for understanding how reef ecosystems function and fail. The transformation of your reef from a thriving, diverse ecosystem to a struggling community of survivors has occurred within the span of your individual lifetime. You've experienced firsthand the collapse of ecological complexity, the simplification of food webs, and the reduction of biodiversity that characterizes ecosystem degradation. Your survival through this transition makes you a witness to one of the most dramatic environmental changes in recent geological history. Your massive presence on the reef floor has become a monument to persistence, but even monuments can crumble. The decades of environmental stress have taken their toll in ways that become more apparent with each passing year. Your shell, once a pristine fortress of calcium carbonate, now shows hairline fractures that spiderweb across its surface. The constant exposure to increasingly acidic water has begun dissolving the very structure you've spent a lifetime building. The repair mechanisms that once sealed minor damage with ease now struggle to keep pace with the deterioration. Each crack requires precious energy to mend, energy that becomes harder to spare as your overall condition declines. The chemical processes that built your shell work in reverse now, dissolution competing with deposition in a battle you're slowly losing. Your body prioritizes the most critical repairs, leaving smaller cracks to widen and spread. Your algae partners, those faithful companions that have sustained you through decades, begin showing signs of their own decline. The strains that replaced your original colonists are themselves being replaced by even more heat-adapted varieties, but each transition becomes more difficult. Your tissues, scarred by repeated bleaching events, don't integrate new algae as efficiently as they once did. The partnership that once seemed seamless now requires constant management and adjustment. The filtering capacity that made you legendary among reef organisms starts to diminish as your siphon tissues age and scar. Decades of processing increasingly contaminated water have left deposits of pollutants in your system, toxins that your body can't eliminate. These accumulated poisons interfere with cellular processes, reducing your efficiency and making every biological function more difficult. You work harder now to achieve what once came effortlessly. Your chemical communication abilities, honed through years of environmental challenge, begin to fade as your sensory systems deteriorate. The molecular signals that once provided detailed information about your surroundings become harder to detect and interpret. Your responses to threats slow as the neural pathways that once fired instantly now struggle to transmit their warnings. The reef's early warning network loses one of its most sophisticated nodes. The younger clams in your area, those rare individuals who managed to survive their vulnerable early years, now face the reality of your declining influence. The calm water zones you created through decades of filtering begin to shift as your current generation weakens. The stable refuge you provided starts to disappear, forcing your dependents to find new sources of shelter and protection. Your reproductive cycles become increasingly irregular as hormonal systems damaged by repeated stress events fail to maintain their ancient rhythms. The massive energy investment required for spawning becomes harder to sustain as your overall energy budget tightens. You may have only a few more opportunities to contribute your genetic material to future generations, making each potential reproductive event precious beyond measure. The hitchhiking community living on your shell begins to change as your condition deteriorates. Some species abandon your surface as the chemical environment changes with your declining health. Others arrive to exploit new niches created by your biological breakdown. The ecosystem you've supported for decades enters its own transition phase, adapting to the reality of your mortality. Your waste production, once a valuable resource for the reef community, becomes less reliable as your filtering efficiency drops. The nutrients you've contributed to local food webs for decades begin to decline, creating ripple effects throughout the simplified ecosystem. Other organisms must adjust their strategies to compensate for the loss of your biological services. The storms that batter your reef now pose genuine threats to your survival. Your weakened shell structure can't absorb impacts the way it once did, and cracks that would have been minor inconveniences now become serious structural problems. Each tempest brings the possibility of catastrophic damage that your compromised repair systems might not be able to address. Your daily routines become more conservative as you instinctively protect your failing systems. Your shell opens less frequently and for shorter periods, reducing your exposure to environmental stresses, but also limiting your feeding opportunities. This defensive strategy helps preserve your remaining strength, but accelerates the downward spiral of declining nutrition and weakening body systems. The temperature tolerance that allowed you to survive previous bleaching events begins to narrow as your cellular repair mechanisms wear down. Heat shock that once triggered temporary stress responses now causes permanent damage to critical tissues. Your algae partners sense this increasing vulnerability and begin preparing for another forced evacuation. Though both of you know recovery might not be possible this time, your massive size, once your greatest protection, now becomes a liability as your support systems struggle to maintain such a large organism. The energy required to keep your enormous body functioning increases even as your capacity to generate that energy decreases. The biological economics that sustained your growth for decades now work against your continued survival. The reef around you continues its relentless transformation, but you're no longer keeping pace with the changes. New challenges arise faster than you can adapt to them, and your responses become increasingly inadequate. The environment that you've helped shape through decades of filtering and waste production begins to shift in ways that no longer favor large, long-lived organisms like yourself. Your chemical signatures begin broadcasting distress signals that other organisms recognize instinctively. The molecular markers of declining health spread through the water column, alerting scavengers and opportunists to prepare for your eventual demise. The reef community that has depended on your presence for so long starts making contingency plans for a future without you. The spawning coordination that once seemed natural now requires enormous effort as your communication systems fail. The chemical dialogues that synchronized reproductive events become harder to maintain as your signal strength weakens. The other clams in your network must compensate for your declining participation, but the loss of your contribution makes successful reproduction less likely for everyone. Your algae partners begin their final exodus as your tissues become too damaged to support their colonies. The bleaching that occurs now isn't triggered by external temperature spikes, but by internal system failures that create toxic conditions within your own body. The organisms that have shared your existence for decades abandon ship, leaving you pale and energy-starved in your final crisis. The filtering currents that defined your presence on the reef floor grow weak and intermittent as your siphon muscles lose their strength. The massive water processing operation that made you a cornerstone of the ecosystem slows to a trickle, then stops entirely for extended periods. The local water quality begins to decline as your biological treatment plant goes offline. Your shell, that magnificent fortress built over decades of steady growth, begins to show signs of imminent structural failure. The cracks that started as hairline fractures widen into gaps that compromise the integrity of your protective barrier. The internal pressure from your tissues can no longer be contained by the weakening calcium carbonate walls. The fish communities that have used your shell as their ancestral home base sense the approaching end and begin dispersing to find alternative shelter. Generations of fish that knew no other landmark than your massive presence must suddenly navigate a reef without their primary reference point. The ecological relationships built around your permanence start unraveling as species prepare for your absence. Your energy reserves, accumulated over years of successful feeding, drain away as your body struggles to maintain basic functions. The stored resources that once sustained you through environmental challenges now barely keep your essential systems operating. Each day becomes a battle between the energy required for survival and the diminishing capacity to generate that energy. The reef community prepares for the ecological disruption that will follow your death. The nutrients locked in your massive tissues will be released in a pulse that could destabilize local chemical balances. The physical structure you provide will collapse, eliminating habitat for dozens of species. The biological services you've performed for decades will simply cease, forcing the entire community to reorganize around your absence. Your consciousness, such as it is, begins to fade as neural systems shut down under the accumulated stress of decades. The chemical processing that allowed you to interpret your environment becomes sporadic and unreliable. The world that you've known through molecular signals and water currents starts to disappear as your ability to perceive it fails. The partnerships that sustained you through environmental catastrophes can no longer overcome the fundamental breakdown of your biological systems. Your algae are gone, your filtering capacity is nearly zero, and your shell integrity approaches critical failure. The remarkable organism that survived decades of environmental chaos finally succumbs to the cumulative damage of a lifetime spent adapting to an increasingly hostile world. Your massive shell begins its final opening, not in response to feeding opportunities or environmental conditions, but because the muscles that have held it closed for decades can no longer maintain their grip. The slow gaping of your valves signals to the reef community that your remarkable journey from microscopic larva to ecosystem cornerstone has reached its end. The water that flows through your open shell no longer carries the chemical signatures of an active filter feeder. Instead, it brings scavengers and decomposers who sense the approaching feast. Your death will feed dozens of organisms and provide nutrients for algae blooms that might sustain the reef community for months. Even in dying, you continue to serve the ecosystem you've supported for so long. Your tissues begin their final breakdown, releasing the accumulated biomass of decades back into the reef system. The phosphorus and nitrogen locked in your body will fertilize new growth. The trace elements you've concentrated through years of filtering will become available to other organisms. Your death becomes a massive nutrient pulse that helps sustain the struggling ecosystem through another difficult period. The empty shell you leave behind will serve the reef community for decades to come. Its massive bulk will provide habitat for countless organisms, its complex surfaces creating microenvironments that support biodiversity in an increasingly simplified world. Fish will shelter in its cavities, corals will grow on its surfaces, and new clams might even settle in its shadow. Your genetic legacy lives on in the larvae produced during your final reproductive events. Some carry adaptations you developed through decades of environmental stress, innovations that might help them survive in the changed world they're inheriting. Others bear genetic combinations that could prove crucial for the species' long-term survival as conditions continue to deteriorate. The reef community begins adapting to your absence even before your tissues have fully decomposed. Water currents shift without your massive bulk to deflect them. Nutrient cycling patterns change without your filtering activities. Species interactions reorganize around new realities. The ecosystem you helped shape for decades starts its transition to whatever comes next. Your death marks more than the end of an individual organism. It represents the closing of an era in reef history. You were among the last of your generation to survive the great environmental transition, a living bridge between the stable past and the chaotic present. Your passing eliminates one of the few remaining connections to the reef ecosystem that existed before the acceleration of climate change. The story of your life, written in the growth rings of your shell, will eventually be read by scientists studying the pace and impact of environmental change. Your tissues, preserved in sediment layers, will provide evidence of how organisms adapted to unprecedented challenges. Your remains will become part of the geological record, a testament to life's persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. But your story is also part of a larger narrative about resilience and adaptation in the face of environmental catastrophe. Your survival through decades of degrading conditions demonstrates that some organisms can persist through dramatic ecological transitions. Your partnerships with algae show how species can rapidly co-evolve to meet new challenges. Your role in maintaining ecosystem function proves that individual organisms can have impacts far beyond their own survival. The reef continues without you, changed by your absence, but carrying forward the legacy of your decades of contribution. The water you filtered, the nutrients you provided, the shelter you offered, all of these gifts continue to influence the ecosystem long after your death. Your impact on the reef community extends far beyond your physical presence, woven into the very fabric of how the ecosystem functions. The younger clams that survive in your area carry genetic material influenced by your decades of successful reproduction. Their biology reflects lessons learned from your environmental experiences, adaptations that might prove crucial for their own survival. In this way, your individual struggle against environmental degradation becomes part of your species' evolutionary response to climate change. Your empty shell becomes a monument to persistence, a calcium carbonate testament to what's possible when organisms adapt quickly enough to keep pace with environmental change. Future generations of reef inhabitants will use your shell as shelter, never knowing that it once housed an organism that witnessed the transformation of their entire world. Your physical legacy will outlast your biological one, serving the reef community for decades to come. The nutrients released by your decomposition fuel a brief revival of biological activity in your immediate area. Algae blooms create food for small organisms, which in turn support larger predators. Your death generates a pulse of productivity that helps sustain the simplified ecosystem through another challenging period. Even in your absence, you continue to serve the community you supported for so long. Your story ends where it began, with microscopic larvae drifting in the ocean currents, searching for suitable places to settle. Some of these larvae carry genetic material you contributed to the gene pool, adaptations forged through your decades of survival in increasingly challenging conditions. Others represent entirely different genetic combinations, evolutionary experiments that might prove even more successful in the changing worlds. The reef system that emerges from the environmental catastrophes of your lifetime will be fundamentally different from the one you originally joined. Simpler, more dynamic, less diverse, but still functioning, still supporting life, still adapting to whatever challenges arise next. Your contribution to this transformed ecosystem extends far beyond your individual existence, embedded in the genetic heritage of your species and the ecological relationships you helped establish. Your remarkable journey from vulnerable larva to ecosystem cornerstone demonstrates the power of biological adaptation in the face of environmental change. Your partnerships with algae, your chemical communication networks, your filtering services all represent evolutionary innovations that emerged in response to unprecedented challenges. Your life story becomes part of the larger narrative of how life persists and adapts in a rapidly changing world. The microscopic larvae that drift past your decomposing remains face a world that would be unrecognizable to the creature you once were. The water they navigate is warmer, more acidic, and filled with chemical signatures that speak of an ecosystem in transition. Some carry genetic modifications inherited from your final spawning events, heat-resistant proteins, enhanced stress response systems, modified shell-building mechanisms that might help them survive in conditions that would have killed their ancestors. These larvae drift for weeks now instead of days, their extended planktonic phase a response to the scarcity of suitable settlement sites. The chemical cues they follow lead them through underwater deserts where coral cities once thrived, Many exhaust their energy reserves before finding anywhere to attach, their tiny forms sinking into the abyss to join the countless others who didn't make it. But some persist, driven by the same biological stubbornness that kept you alive for decades. When settlement finally occurs, it happens in places that would have been considered marginal habitat during your early years. Rocky outcrops exposed to high-wave energy become prime real estate. Artificial structures like shipwrecks and seawalls provide hard substrate where natural reefs has collapsed. These new colonists don't have the luxury of choosing perfect conditions. They take whatever they can find and adapt accordingly. The successful settlers grow differently than your generation did. Their shells develop thicker walls from the start, anticipating the acidic conditions they'll face as adults. Their tissue structures are modified to better integrate with heat-adapted algae strains. Their metabolisms run more conservatively, prioritizing survival over rapid growth. They're building for a harsher world from day one. The reef communities these young clams join bear little resemblance to the diverse ecosystems of the past. Simplified food webs connect fewer species in more direct relationships. The intricate partnerships that once characterized mature reefs have been replaced by more basic survival strategies. Competition is fiercer for the limited resources available, but cooperation has also become more essential for surviving repeated environmental catastrophes. Your genetic legacy spreads through these new populations, carried by larvae that drift on currents to distant reefs. The adaptations you developed through decades of environmental stress become part of the species' evolutionary toolkit, tested and refined by each new generation. Some innovations prove successful and spread widely. Others are discarded as conditions change faster than organisms can adapt to them. The empty shell you left behind slowly transforms into a new type of reef structure. Boring organisms tunnel through the calcium carbonate, creating a honeycomb of passages that house small fish and invertebrates. Encrusting corals cover the outer surfaces, adding their own skeletal material to your legacy. Algae colonize every available surface, turning your remains into a photosynthetic powerhouse that feeds the local community. This shell-turned habitat supports more biodiversity per square foot than most of the surrounding simplified reef. The complex three-dimensional structure provides niches for species that can't survive in the flattened rubble fields that dominate the modern landscape. Your death has created an oasis of biological complexity in an increasingly simple world, a testament to the lasting impact individual organisms can have on their ecosystems. The fish that once sheltered around your living bulk adapt to your transformed remains. Some species learn to exploit the new feeding opportunities created by the boring organisms working through your shell. Others use the modified structure as a breeding ground, laying their eggs in protected crevices that didn't exist when you were alive. The ecosystem services you provided continue in altered form, supporting the reef community through its ongoing transition. The nutrient pulse from your decomposition gradually dissipates, but its effects linger in the enhanced productivity of the surrounding area. Algae populations that bloomed on your released phosphorus and nitrogen continue to support grazing fish that might otherwise have starved during lean periods. The trace elements you concentrated through decades of filtering become incorporated into new organisms, carrying your biological signature forward into the future. Scientists studying the reef system eventually discover your shell, recognizing it as a remnant from the ecosystem's more stable past. The growth rings in your calcium carbonate structure tell the story of environmental change with remarkable precision. Chemical analysis reveals the increasing acidity, rising temperatures, and pollution loads you experienced during your lifetime. Your remains become a research goldmine, providing detailed records of how climate change affected individual organisms. The data extracted from your shell helps researchers understand the pace and magnitude of environmental transformation in reef systems worldwide. Your growth patterns reveal how organisms responded to unprecedented challenges, while the chemical signatures in your tissues document the changing chemistry of the ocean itself. Your individual story becomes part of the larger scientific effort to understand and predict ecosystem responses to continued climate change. But your true legacy lives on in the reef community that continues to evolve around the habitat you created. The young clams that eventually settle near your shell benefit from the modified water flow patterns created by your remains. The fish populations that use your structure as their home base pass down behavioral knowledge to their offspring. The entire local ecosystem bears the imprint of your decades of biological activity. The reef system continues its transformation, driven by forces far beyond the influence of any individual organism. Sea levels rise, weather patterns shift, and ocean chemistry changes in ways that make your lifetime of environmental challenges seem modest by comparison. But the biological innovations that emerged during your era, the rapid algae evolution, the enhanced chemical communication, the flexible partnership strategies, provide tools that help reef organisms cope with whatever comes next. The species partnerships you pioneered become templates for survival in the new ocean. Clams and algae continue their co-evolutionary dance, but the steps change with each generation as environmental pressures intensify. The chemical communication networks you helped establish spread to other reef systems, creating early warning systems that span entire ocean basins. The filtering strategies you perfected are adopted by new species, filling the ecological niches left vacant by extinctions. Your story becomes part of the oral tradition of the reef, though not in any form humans would recognize. Chemical signals carry information about successful survival strategies from one generation to the next. Genetic memories encode responses to environmental challenges that proved effective in the past. The biological wisdom accumulated during your lifetime gets passed down through molecular mechanisms that preserve successful adaptations while discarding failed experiments. The reef community that emerges from the ongoing environmental crisis is shaped by the lessons learned during your era. The simplified food webs reflect the reality of fewer species, but the relationships between surviving organisms are more flexible and resilient than before. The reduced biodiversity is compensated by increased adaptability, with species capable of filling multiple ecological roles as conditions change. Future reef systems will be built on the foundation of organisms like yourself, the survivors who persisted through the great environmental transition and passed their adaptations onto subsequent generations. The reef ecosystems of tomorrow may be simpler and less diverse than those of the past, but they will carry forward the genetic innovations and biological strategies that proved successful during the most challenging period in recent ecological history. Your individual journey from microscopic larva to ecosystem cornerstone represents more than just personal survival. It demonstrates the power of biological persistence in the face of overwhelming environmental change. Your partnerships, your adaptations, your contributions to reef function all become part of the evolutionary heritage that will help reef organisms survive whatever challenges the future brings. Your death marks not just the end of an individual life, but the completion of a biological legacy that will influence reef ecosystems for generations to come. Life as a giant clam might be rough, but there's another animal out there that has it way worse. Trust me, it's wild. Check out that video and see for yourself. The larvae that drift past your decomposing shell carry something your generation never possessed: genetic memories of catastrophe. Their DNA holds blueprints for surviving in a world that would have killed their ancestors within days. Heat shock proteins activate before temperature spikes even begin. Calcium carbonate production systems work efficiently in water so acidic it would have dissolved your early shell like sugar in rain. These microscopic survivors don't have the luxury of searching for perfect settlement sites. They grab whatever hard surface they can find and make it work. Rusty shipwrecks become prime real estate. Concrete seawalls offer more stability than the crumbling natural reef. They're building their lives on humanity's discarded infrastructure because that's all that's left. The successful ones grow fast and die young. There's no time for the decades-long development cycles your generation enjoyed. They reach reproductive maturity in years instead of decades, spawning frantically before the next environmental catastrophe wipes them out. Their shells are thicker but smaller, built for survival rather than longevity. They're not trying to become monuments. They're just trying to pass on their genes before it's too late. The algae partnerships that sustain these new clams change completely every few years. When one strain fails, another takes its place within months rather than seasons. The symbiosis becomes a revolving door of microscopic tenants, each bringing different survival strategies to the partnership. The clams that survive longest are those that can integrate with the widest variety of algae strains. Your massive shell continues its transformation into something unprecedented. The boring organisms working through your calcium carbonate create networks of tunnels that function like apartment buildings for tiny reef creatures. Each chamber houses a different species, and the complex becomes more diverse than most natural reef structures. Your death created more habitat than your life ever did. The fish communities using your shell develop behaviors that would have been impossible in the old reef. They coordinate their activities through chemical signals, sharing information about food sources and predator movements with a sophistication that approaches true communication. The environmental pressure has accelerated their evolution in ways that surprise even researchers studying the system. Scientists eventually piece together your life story from the chemical records preserved in your shell. They discover that you lived through environmental changes that occurred faster than any in the geological record. Your growth rings document the acceleration of climate change with precision that rivals their best instruments. Your tissues contain pollutants that didn't exist when you were born, chemicals created by human industry that accumulated in your body over decades. But the most remarkable discovery is how quickly you adapted. The algae strains in your later years were genetically distinct from those in your youth, evolved specifically to survive in the conditions you both faced. Your own tissues show signs of rapid genetic modification, cellular machinery rebuilt to function in an increasingly hostile environment. You were part of an evolutionary experiment conducted in real time. The reef community that grows around your remains operates under different rules than the one you knew. Species don't establish permanent territories. They move constantly as conditions shift. Food webs reorganize monthly as populations crash and recover. Nothing stays the same long enough to become stable, but somehow the system continues functioning. Your filtering legacy lives on in ways you never could have imagined. The young clams that settle near your shell don't just filter water, they actively modify its chemistry, removing pollutants and adjusting pH levels through biological processes your generation never developed. They've become living water treatment plants, engineered by evolution to function in contaminated seas. The spawning events of this new generation bear no resemblance to the coordinated spectacles of your era. They spawn continuously now, releasing small batches of gametes whenever conditions seem favorable. There's no waiting for perfect timing because perfect conditions never come. It's biological guerrilla warfare, with reproduction happening in brief windows of opportunity. Your genetic material continues spreading through the population, but it's being modified so rapidly that your direct descendants would be unrecognizable within a few generations. Evolution has shifted into overdrive, producing new variants faster than scientists can catalog them. Your contribution to the gene pool becomes just one ingredient in a constantly changing recipe for survival. The reef that emerges from this evolutionary crucible becomes something entirely new. It's not trying to recreate the past, it's building something that never existed before. The simplified ecosystem operates on principles of rapid adaptation rather than stable complexity. Species don't specialize anymore. They generalize, becoming biological Swiss Army knives, capable of filling multiple roles as conditions demand. Your shell becomes the foundation stone of this new world. The tunnels boring through your calcium carbonate create a three-dimensional maze that houses more species per cubic inch than the original reef ever did. But these aren't the same species that lived there before. They're evolutionary newcomers, creatures that didn't exist when you were alive, shaped by pressures your generation never imagined. The chemical communication network that once connected clam communities now spans entire ocean basins. The molecular signals have become more sophisticated, carrying detailed information about environmental conditions thousands of miles away. Early warning systems that took decades to develop in your time now emerge within months, driven by desperate necessity. Young clams settling in this transformed world don't follow the patient growth strategies of your era. They prioritize reproduction over size, spawning multiple times per year instead of waiting for perfect conditions. Their shells grow in spurts rather than steady rings, reflecting the chaotic environment they inhabit. They're not building for permanence, they're building for immediate survival. The algae partnerships become increasingly bizarre as both organisms push the boundaries of what's biologically possible. Some algae strains photosynthesize using wavelengths of light that were blocked by cleaner water in your time. Others have learned to process pollutants as energy sources, turning contamination into fuel. The symbiosis becomes a laboratory for biochemical innovation. Your decomposing tissues release trace elements that become crucial building blocks for the next generation. The rare minerals you concentrated through decades of filtering are now scarce resources fought over by competing organisms. Your death becomes a treasure trove of materials that can't be found anywhere else in the degraded ecosystem. The storms that batter this new reef are unlike anything from your era. They arrive with little warning and devastating intensity, reshaping the entire seafloor in hours. But the organisms that survive have learned to rebuild quickly, establishing new communities within days of catastrophic destruction. They've traded resilience for rapid recovery. Scientists studying the system discover that evolution itself has changed. The traditional mechanisms of gradual genetic modification have been supplemented by rapid horizontal gene transfer, with species borrowing successful adaptations from each other across taxonomic boundaries. The normal rules of inheritance break down under extreme selective pressure. Your legacy becomes part of a biological arms race against environmental collapse. Each generation must be more adaptable than the last, more capable of surviving conditions that would have been instantly lethal to their predecessors. The reef becomes a testing ground for life's ultimate limits, pushing organisms to their absolute breaking points. But somehow, incredibly, life persists. Not the life you knew, not the reef you inhabited, but something new and strange and wonderful in its own desperate way. Your story becomes part of a larger narrative about transformation and survival, about how life finds ways to continue even when everything seems impossible. The tiny larvae drifting through the water column carry within them the accumulated wisdom of catastrophe. They know things their ancestors never learned, possess capabilities that didn't exist when you were young. They're the inheritors of a broken world, but they're also its potential saviors. And in the end, that might be enough. Not the reef that was, but the reef that could be. Not the stable paradise of the past, but the dynamic, chaotic, endlessly inventive ecosystem of the future. Your death wasn't the end of the story. It was just the closing of one chapter in life's endless book of adaptation and survival. The reef continues without you, forever changed but somehow still functioning, still supporting life, still evolving toward whatever comes next. Your journey from helpless larva to ecosystem cornerstone represents just one thread in the vast tapestry of biological persistence, but it's a thread that will be woven into every future pattern. Life as a giant clam might be rough, but there's another animal out there that has it way worse. Trust me, it's wild. Check out that video and see for yourself. Until then, see you soon.